Hey everybody, movie reviewer next door here, and I'm back on another review. This time, I saw Life After Fighting. This is, oh no, my color's messed up. Yay! Gotta love these cameras. This is an action thriller film directed by Bren Foster from 2024, and it stars Bren Foster, Cassie Howarth, Annabelle Stevenson, and Luke Ford. In this film, retired martial arts world champion Alex Faulkner has settled into a simple life when the disappearance of two of his students leads to an unthinkable discovery close to home. Just when all hope of finding the children is lost, he locates the imprisoned girls and in services an international child trafficking operation, which draws him back into the fight of his life against those behind it. So, what did I think of Life After Fighting? Well, I ended up watching this because I saw a lot of clips on there's a YouTube channel I follow. It might be Edgar Renton, it might be somebody else who posts random like fight clips from movies, like recent movies and sometimes older movies. And I saw this clip of Bren Foster, which was a name that I had recognized. Um, and I really liked how the fighting was. I liked that it was fluid. It reminded me kind of Jesse V. Johnson's direction, or maybe Isaac Florentine's direction. And overall, while not perfect, this is a very nice surprise. It's a very well made, very exciting. The action scenes are very exciting, and just actually pretty decently impactful film. And with a few tweaks, I could see this becoming like an action classic. But let me get to the cast first. Bren Foster plays just Alex Faulkner. He's the owner of this martial arts dojo in Australia. Bren Foster's an actor I don't know a lot about. I know he's been in a couple of Steven Seagal's films, like some of his later films where he'd get a younger martial artist, that being Bren Foster at the time, to do a lot of the actual fighting, and then Steven Seagal would um just basically do his sitting down and that shit. He did the same thing with Victor Webster in, I think, A Good Man. He had him in that. Uh, Bren Foster was in Maximum Conviction, Force of Execution. I know those titles are not the best, but he's been in some other like science fiction-y stuff. But I think he really does excel as an action lead. Because again, like Scott Adkins, his acting is pretty decent, to be honest. From what I've seen in other stuff, he's been pretty decent as well. His acting is not bad. That's one thing. If you want like a likable action lead, I think he's very likable. And doesn't scream ego, even though this is kind of a vanity project. But his fighting, holy fuck, his fighting is insane. And I saw a tiny bit of it from that clip from Maximum Conviction where he like kicks the two guards at once. I was like, okay, this guy actually knows what the fuck he's doing. This isn't a lazy like physical performance. But yeah, I think he's a great lead. Cassie Howarth plays Samantha Hathaway. She's a recently divorced mother to the guy who is our main villain. Um and she kind of strikes up a French a relationship with our main character. I think she did a great job as well. She's only been in a couple things. Something called Model Citizen, excuse me, and Two Graves in the Desert, which was a Michael Madsen, William Baldwin film that I've heard somebody talk about, but I've never seen. She did a pretty decent job acting wise. I bought her as this character. Um, Annabelle Stevenson plays Julie Craylan. She's kind of the assistant to our main character at the dojo. Um, I knew I recognized her face. She was in a film called Escape Room. Not the Sony one, because there's multiple films called Escape Room, but the Will Wernick directed 2017 Escape Room, which Will Wernick has directed a couple horror films. He apparently he directed something this past year or this year. He also directed Follow Me or No Escape was the name I saw it under. Safer at Home, which I have, but I haven't seen it. I've seen Escape Room and Follow Me. Escape Room is decent enough, I thought. I'd have to watch it again. Follow Me, I'm a bit half and half on it. I'd have to go through his movies again. I wouldn't mind going through them. He only has four. But yeah, she was in that, the Escape Room. She was, I think she was the character that was naked throughout most of it because she's stuck in a cage, but I don't fully remember. But I thought she did a good job in this, um, especially dramatically. And Luke Ford plays Victor Dimov, who is Samantha's ex. I think he does a good job, and he's good enough. But I will get to something about his character that I'm like certain things, movie like filming wise and writing wise, that I'm not huge on. But one thing I do want to get right off the bat: Brent Foster directed, wrote, starred in, and choreographed this film. That's a lot for one guy to take on. And that's most likely due to the film not having a huge budget. I don't know the budget, but given that it's an Australian production, I'm guessing it's around 3-ish million at the very most. And there are times where that does bleed through. There are times where, not really in the first half, but in the second half, when there's this big long stretch of action, there's a couple bits of CGI blood that just doesn't look the greatest. And it's a it's kind of weird because there is practical blood in this film, but I'm guessing that that they wanted it to look a certain way, so they had the CG blood at that one point, and it just doesn't look good. And again, I know I'm a person that'll notice this. Most people won't notice it, but there's a bit where a guy spits up blood onto a wall, and it's kind of shakily implemented where they're trying to stabilize it as the camera's moving down, but because they don't have like a steady cam to have the cam go down slowly or in a succinct way, it's kind of shaking and it's kind of hard. It's a bit harder to make the CGI blood stay on the wall in the way they want. So there are a couple moments of that. There are some decent practical effects. There are some cool kills that are pretty gruesome that I was a fan of. But I, I don't exactly know why they'd go for the CGI blood if they already have practical effects. There's a couple like knife stabs that don't like the stabs themselves, they have the right sound effect. That does help. That it has the sound effect that makes it sound a lot more brutal. But there's some bits where like a throat slit will happen and it'll actually be there, and then there's other times where it'll be a CG throat slit, and I'm like, why is that there? Why does that have to be a CG throat slit? I don't really understand that. That kind of happened too in Jesse B. Johnson's film Savage Dog, where a character gets their throat slit and there's a really bad CGI blood coming out. And I know his movies do not have high budgets. That movie had a below $3 million budget, I'm pretty sure, which is not a lot of money for what they're trying to do. He's trying to go for kind of an epic feel with that low money. But I mean, the film, I still really enjoyed it, Savage Dog, but that was a bit of a letdown there. But here, I just really don't see the need for the CGI blood. This film only has a couple of um, main settings. There's this dojo, there's his house, and then there's the place where the children are being held captive. So not a lot of settings for a 2 hour and 5 minute film. That's another thing. The film is 2 hours and 5 minutes. You could easily cut 20 minutes out of that, or at least 10. There's a lot of scenes in the dojo that I feel go on a bit too long. Even fight scenes that I think could be shortened a bit, especially in the first half. A lot of the fight scenes in the first half don't have much of a goal other than intimidation, like towards the villains to our main character. And there's one that goes on for like 3 minutes, and I'm like, okay, you could cut that down a little bit. I know people wouldn't usually be like, oh, you should cut out action. I'm not saying cut it out, but certain fights I do think go on a tad bit too long in the first half. Um, One that I'm fine with being as long as it was the main character going against the guy that he apparently gave up to when he was professionally fighting. The reason the film being called Life After Fighting. Um, I I'm fine with that because it's built up and it's supposed to be this kind of main event of the first half of the film. But most of the like deadly fighting happens in the second half of the film. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with having an action-packed finale. That's what this does. It makes a lot of the waiting worth it. And not to say that the film is boring, it's not boring. Even with as long as it is, I was interested in the story. But I do think that, again, it could be cut down a bit. Most action movies that are classics aren't that long. They're around an hour and a half to about an hour and 45 minutes. Even if you cut this down to an hour and 50, I think it would flow a ton better. Just, again, 15 minutes out of it would do wonders. And there are many points that are a bit unnecessary, so it would make sense to cut it down a bit. The villain also, Victor, excuse me, he's not a bad villain, but he's also kind of just very stereotypical. And with a film that takes itself as seriously as this one does, it does deal with human trafficking. You'd expect them to fucking make a villain that's a bit more realistic in a sense. There's a bit where he cuts off a kid's finger, and I'm like, okay, I get what they're going for, making it reprehensible. But you have to set it in some sort of reality because this film is set in some sort of reality. It's not like this film goes for outlandish choreography or outlandish action, outlandish stuff in general. So I get what they're going for and I'm okay with it, but I was expecting a bit of a deeper villain that would, I don't know, I was expecting a bit more character to him, other than he's an evil ex who also happens to be a human trafficker. Um, but I do want to talk about a lot of great things this film does. First off, one thing that that Brent Foster realizes is that if you have actors that can actually fucking fight, you show the fucking fights. Because a lot of these directors that I see who have talented people working on it, they will still cut and make it look like the actors are cheating. Transporter 3 is a good example of this. Jason Statham always was able to do the choreography in the first and second Transporter films. And then Olivia Megaton came around, and his editor, Camille Delamare, who also made Brick Mansions and Transporter Refueled, which I haven't seen, but I've heard Brick Mansions is okay. I've heard Transporter Refueled isn't that great. Transporter 3, if you look at the behind the scenes footage, you can see that there's really fucking good choreography there. In the movie, you wouldn't be able to tell because everything is so horribly edited. In this film, most of the fights just happen. And the camera does move. But I think the way the camera moves in this does actually accentuate the brutality of the fights and seem a lot more fun. Because there are times where you can get to so like the choreography here doesn't feel like they're dancing. It doesn't feel choreographed. It feels like an actual like brutal takedown. It does. A brutal fucking beatdown. And that's what I want in an action movie like this. It's about human trafficking, so you gotta have the action be just as brutal as the subject it is talking about. Um, Again, there's gonna be inevitable ties to Sound of Freedom because people hear human trafficking now and they always talk about Sound of Freedom. Sound of Freedom was a piece of shit. Oh. because it's the same idiots. It's the same idiots that an action movie with a retired hitman or a hitman in general, and they're like, yeah, it's trying to ride the wave of John Wick. Imagine if every adventure film that came out after Indiana Jones was compared to Indiana Jones. Imagine comparing. Okay, well, actually, there are cases where that would work. Like comparing Tomb Raider to Indiana Jones, like Lara Croft Tomb Raider, the Angelina Jolie film. I get it. There's enough different about their characters, though, to the point where I really don't get it in certain ways. But I can understand somebody who's never seen the movie and just saw the trailer and they're like, oh, she's an explorer too. She's just a female. It's female Indiana Jones. Just like they're like, oh, Kate is female John Wick. Fucking Gunpowder Milkshake is female John Wick. Close with Numir Page, female John Wick. It does get annoying hearing all of these things like that. Like, is Taken is Sound of Freedom not ripping off Taken then in your words? If you think John Wick is so original, is Taken not being ripped off by Sound of Freedom? It's not actually, because Sound of Freedom isn't really an action film. It's trying to be more of a thought-provoking drama or thriller, but whatever. But this film, the only real thing it has in in common with Sound of Freedom is that there is a human trafficking plot. It doesn't go super deep into it, and I think that's to its advantage. Um, because I feel like if you go too deep into that, I feel like with a subject like human trafficking, you kind of either go deep into it or you don't. Kind of like Taken. Taken didn't go really deep into it, but I can kind of understand why, because it's also trying to be just a fun action movie, as this is. But this is also taking itself a bit more serious than something like Taken, or just your normal garden variety action movie nowadays, which I'm fine with. It's not like this film takes itself too seriously that it's not fun. It is still really fun, but it definitely is taking itself a tad more serious. Um, Again, choreography, stellar. Bren Foster knows what the fuck he's doing. Again, acting wise, the cast does a great job. Uh, no one really stood out as a bad actor. The kids are even pretty alright, even though it doesn't really focus on them a lot. There's some pretty brutal takedowns in this. There's a bit where Bren Foster like takes a doorknob off of a door and like stabs a guy in the leg, then stabs him, I think in the crotch and then in the neck, and then he fucking squirts blood on the wall. There's one guy that he like crushes his fucking head. Like like he keeps like bashing this guy's fucking head into the ground. And then there's like a close up of his head and you can see like there's like I think guts coming out. There's some fucked up shit in this. There's one guy that his like fatality for him is like bashing his head into a fucking glass wall and then pushing his throat down onto the broken pieces of glass and sliding it across, and then you see his fucking neck. There's a lot of fun to be had in this. If you're okay with the kind of overlong running time, there's a lot of fun to be had here. It's also if you're an action fan. And this did just straight up remind me of Jesse V. Johnson, Isaac Florentine, both in their heyday. Again, two of the best action directors, period, in recent memory. And it just makes me want more of this type of action where there's not like, well, I mean, you don't need a huge budget. If you wanted to go for a huge budget and get bigger actors, fine. But I don't really think there's a reason for it when you've got actors like Bren Foster, like Scott Adkins, like Cynthia Rothrock, like Don the Dragon Wilson, who are like good enough actors and can hold a film. Casper Van Dien as well. There's many names that I could list who can hold together an action film and still excel with the choreography and have a pretty simple story that works well, good acting, and it just makes me want more. A Cynthia Rothrock film where she gets to kick ass with pretty decent production values and just a fun movie. We need more fun movies. Every movie nowadays is trying to be a fucking classic or a fucking just every movie wants to be its everything wants to be Oscar bait now. And it's annoying. The score also in the film, I have to look. I wrote it down. Who did the score by Jason Fernandez was really good. I think he did a good job. It reminded me of Jesse V. Johnson's scores by Sean Murray. He does the scores for pretty much every Jesse V. Johnson film. It reminded me of that, which again, Sean Murray is a good comparison. He also worked on the Call of Duty series. Forgot which ones. I'm not a Call of Duty guy, but pretty good. Um, and yeah, like if you see this film, if you see it on a streaming service or if you're on those sites, um, definitely give it a watch. If you're into action, I definitely think that you will enjoy this at least to an extent. Again, a bit overlong, some not great CGI blood in the second half. The villain's a bit underdeveloped as well, but for the most part, I think this is a very worthy of your time action film. So, that was my review of Life After Fighting. If you've seen the film, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. If you have any recommendations, put them down there as well. And movie reviewer next door.